Thank you. Sahityavithi 2022, the virtual conference, attempts to find out how lifelong learning improves social inclusion, active citizenship, personal development, competitiveness, and employability. The considerations in the conference will help to realize the innovations in language and literature, and will provide a platform to discuss how it will impact on lifelong learning and quality education. Keeping these things in mind, this plenary session of Sahityavithi 2022 one-day virtual conference on language and literature for lifelong learning and quality education has been organized. The speakers of today's session are Dr. M. Shobha, Professor, Department of English, Bangalore University, Bangalore. Dr. M. Shobha teaches at the Department of English, Bangalore University as professor. She has more than 20 years of teaching experience. She was the recipient of Canadian Commonwealth Scholarship from November 2000 to April 2002 and carried out her research work at McGill University, Montreal as visiting research fellow. Her areas of research interest are Canadian literature, gender studies, critical theory, cultural studies, and Indian literature. She has presented and published several research papers in national and international conferences and journals respectively. She has worked as the member of Board of Studies of several colleges and universities. She is the regional representative South India of Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies since August 2020. She has been a guest editor of IACLALS newsletter issue number 10, 2021. The second speaker of the session is Dr. Somali Gupta, Professor, Department of English, Government BYT PG Autonomous College, Durg, Chhattisgarh. Dr. Somali Gupta has 36 years of teaching experience as a professor of English in the higher education industry, Government of India. She is a professional member of ISABS, Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Sciences. She is a certified human process facilitator by ISABS since 2005. She is a certified executive coach from CLI, Coaching and Leadership International Canada, recognized by ICF. Her research topic, Youth Anxiety and Stress Within the Higher Education System, a group analysis of the students from the backward classes of Chhattisgarh, is awarded by UGC. She has completed 2 awareness campaigns in solid waste management sponsored by the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Dr. Gupta has published a number of research articles in national and international journals, has the copyrights of 2 edited books and published 1. She has also delivered keynote addresses in a number of national and international conferences and refresher courses organized by 5 universities and colleges. She is the member of the editorial board of 2 international journals, Journal of Teaching English for Specific and Academic Purposes, University of NIS Serbia, Journal of Studies in Social Sciences and Humanities, NIS Serbia. She is also a reviewer of Spark proposal. The third speaker of this session is Dr. Amita Vikram Dwivedi, Professor and Head Department of English, School of Languages and Literature, Sri Ma Vaishno Devi University, Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Amita Vikram Dwivedi is a Harvard University certified in the art of writing and public speaking and a university faculty specialized in linguistics and literature in the School of Languages and Literature. His research interests include language documentation, writing perspective grammar, and the preservation of rare and endangered languages in the South Asia. Dear all, today we have with us as chairperson of the plenary session, Dr. K.N. Guruprasad. Dr. Guruprasad is currently working as director, Sri Vaishnav Institute of Social Science, Vaishnav Institute of Science, Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vidyalaya, Indore. He works in the area of plant science and specializes in photobiology and magnetobiology. He has an experience of teaching and research in life science of over 35 years. He was professor and head of life science department of Devi Ahilya Vishwavidyalaya, Indore. He has supervised the work of 25 research students who have worked under him for obtaining their PhD degree. He has been the principal investigator of various research projects funded by UGC, CSIR, DST, ICAR, BRNS, MPCST, and BASF India. His work as a visiting scientist in Kobe University, Japan, and Moscow University, Russia. There is over 85 research papers published in research journals of national and international repute. Now, I hand over the session to the Honorable Chairperson of the plenary session, Dr. K. N. Guruprasad. Sir, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag Joshi. I guess we will start with our first speaker of this session, Dr. Shobha. This will be a session with the theme Language and Literature for Lifelong Learning and Quality Education. We have very eminent people as introduced by Dr. Anurag Joshi to speak on this. And may I invite the first speaker?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good afternoon to all of you. I thank the university and in particular Dr. Shilpa Phadnis who contacted me. This is a surprise because I have never been contacted by an unknown university. So I just took it to get to know a university which is far away from the place where I reside. The topic of my lecture today is literary adaptations. I am hoping to connect it to the theme, though I am not in languages and linguistics, but we use linguistic theories in literary analysis. I was also talking to Dr. Shilpa and asking her about the terms that are used in the theme of the conference, and she has explained it to me a little, and with that backdrop, I'll begin this. We all know that literary adaptation is the adapting of a literary source to another genre or medium. It's important as it allows a story to be told in new ways, thereby leading to intertextuality and multiple critical perspectives. It means that more people are exposed to the story and can come to appreciate, review the original. Often, readers look for novels or short stories after seeing an adaptation such as a film, a television series, play, cartoons, graphic novel, or video games, and even theme parks, as the Canadian critic Linda Hutchin points out. There is a proliferation of retellings of well-known stories in the cinema industry, comics, graphic novels in the last decade. The most recent hit film adaptation in the South being Ponniyin Selvan in Tamil, which is based on a historical novel with the same title by Kalki Krishnamurthy. Most often, reviews compare adaptation with the adapted material on the same basis. The search for equivalence leads to superficial and cliched remarks, such as the novel or story is better than the film. However, we need to move beyond this to examine why we need adaptations and when can a literary adaptation be effective and successful in a classroom. There are a number of critical theories to understand the mechanics of adaptations, but since there is no time to explore all of them here, I will be referring to some of the important points of view. I confine myself to literary adaptation in cinema for a textual analysis towards the end of my presentation. Again, there are specific theories related to this kind of adaptation, but before we go into it, I would like to share my experience of dealing with printed text and film version of it. We have included many film adaptations of novels or stories in our MA syllabus with the objective of not only introducing students to another medium, but also to help students who have difficulty in reading printed texts. I work in a state university, and there is a considerable size of student population which does not come with good English language skills to handle the texts prescribed in the syllabus. And I'm sure this is the reality in many universities across the country. In a semester system, it's also not possible at the postgraduate level to attend to basic language problems, since we are all under a lot of pressure to complete the syllabus, conduct exams, and declare results in addition to numerous administrative jobs. The cinematic adaptation of literary texts in our syllabus, particularly in papers like Gender Studies, European Classics Revisited, Indian Literatures in English, Literary and Cultural Studies, Post-Colonial Studies, and to name a few film texts, Gata Shraddha from the regional language, Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, Harry Potter series, Dostana in cultural studies, etc. These films have helped to generate interest in students towards language learning and appreciating literature. In some courses, we have prescribed both the novel or story and the film version of it to encourage them to undertake a comparative analysis. Though they are not in a position to critique the technical aspects of the film medium, they're able to analyze the thematic and ideological concerns of the texts in both the mediums. Reading is an isolated activity. I know we also encourage them to do group reading, but I'm referring to novels, short stories, which involve many hours of reading. So if we look at reading as an isolated activity, watching a film is a group activity. It instills confidence in students and encourages them to engage in a more fruitful interaction with the text. The teacher's presence at the time of screening and drawing the attention of students to some of the significant details has yielded good result in traversing from one text to another. I would like to reflect upon some of the important aspects of adaptation as teachers of English language and literature, who also deal with multiplicity in the conception of texts. One question that bothers us is, what's the relationship between translation and adaptation? The difference has often been articulated in terms of the medium of the final product. While translation remains within the literary realm, adaptation transcodes texts into different media. If we look at graphic adaptations, textual negotiations, we can see that any simple distinction between the two is problematic, especially after theorists like Roman Jakobson, who has elaborated on interlingual, intralingual, and intersemiotic as three kinds of translation. Suchitra Mathur, in one of her essays, notes how, I quote from her, the questions of fidelity and alleged inferiority do seem to distinguish adaptations from translations, making the two occupy significantly different positions within the cultural landscape, I unquote. So one can study in detail the politics of difference between the two in the realm of production as well as reception through a comparative study, which will provide deeper insights into the cultural and marketing worlds. Such a potential for more research and critical views has resulted in adaptation studies, which aims at providing a theoretical foundation to adaptation practices. I will not go in detail to adaptation studies, but would like to highlight a few concepts here. Adaptation studies has done much to draw attention to the various forms and modes of rewriting in literature and visual media during the last quarter of a century. Some scholars are of the opinion that the emergence of discipline was actually a natural consequence of the work of translation studies. I would like to take the help of one more scholar who has worked in this area, K.M. Sharif, who owes it to the work of such scholars as André Lefebvre, Susan Basnet, Mary Snell Hornby, etc. in the Western context, whose work has positioned translation as a form of rewriting. So he claims that though adaptation studies has concentrated largely on intersemiotic rewritings, like in the case of theater and film, it has also tackled intra-linguistic rewritings, such as recontextualization, special version, reduction or abridgment, etc. I briefly summarize his views because it is relevant to the textual analysis that I'm going to do. I summarize his views here for more clarity about the contribution of adaptation studies. According to K.M. Sharif, the two most important theoretical advances made by adaptation studies are, number one, drawing a distinction between adaptation and appropriation, and number two, shifting attention to intertextuality from the traditional binary of antecedent text and rewriting. He refers to one of the eminent critics, Julie Sanders, whose monumental work, Adaptation and Appropriation, in which she clearly distinguishes the two forms of rewriting. Adaptation, even when it differs from the source text in rewriting it, still refers to it and privileges it. Whereas an appropriation, on the other hand, is fundamentally the rewriter's text, which maintains only an intertextual relationship to the antecedent text without privileging it as the original point of enunciation. So Sanders further problematizes the relationship in the post-colonial context, where the canonized texts from colonizing cultures are privileged as points of reference, even when they are drastically rewritten. To mention Achibe's Things Fall Apart, as against Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. She wishes to destabilize the authority of the privileged antecedent text in the post-colonial and post-structural spirit, but it may not work in all contexts. When the focus is shifted to intertextuality of text rather than on the binary of original or antecedent text or rewriting, any text may adapt or appropriate more than one clearly recognizable antecedent text. I'm using the critical terms used in adaptation studies. And K.M. Sharif refers to another critic, a very important critic, who points out that adaptation studies has opened up the notion of unlimited intertextuality, in which each text floats upon a sea of, I quote, a sea of countless earlier texts from which it could not help borrowing. So once again, we go to the post-structuralist, especially deconstructionist view of how there is no original text in its true sense. I'll not get into that. But I just brought in these theoretical frames to help us to point out how they help us unravel the ways in which the writers or rewriters construct the text to make them conform to or subvert the predominant ideological and aesthetic paradigms of given cultures, and adapt or appropriate texts in their transpositions across times, cultures, genres, and media. The best example would be Shakespeare's texts, which will lead to unlimited intertextuality. I would like to briefly attempt one such examination here of Rudali, a short story by Mahashweta Devi, and Rudali, the film, which came in 1993 by Kalpana Lajmi. The short story was adapted and produced as a play in Hindi by Usha Ganguly of the Calcutta Theatre Group, Rangakarmi, in December 1992. Anjum Katyal, who provides and who translates Rudali into English and also gives a wonderful introduction to both the versions, the short story version as well as the adaptation into a play. notes that the play had well over 100 shows playing to packed houses, drew attention of both critics and a theater audience. She notes that each version is mediated by the differing purpose and agenda of its respective author, and that results in strikingly different texts, which have but one feature in common. And she says they are perceived as women-intensive projects, the common agenda, and received as feminist texts. Katyal examines how and why the versions are different and what the changes signify, and how the two writers work towards very different aims. I will not actually get into the details of Katyal's analysis, but I will go to the film text directly. Before that, I would also like to map out the ideological requirements of the short story. Devi's Rudali, I am also hoping that many of you are familiar with this text. I am basically from a literature background, so I can take examples from literary texts. Devi's Rudali documents an evolution in the central character Shanichari, who emerges at the end as better equipped to adapt, survive, and manipulate the system, to be empowered. The author assumes a possible literate urban readership, as the narrative is aimed at desentimentalization through a deliberate choice of journalistic prose and taking away any romanticized view of the people and their lives represented in the story. At the outset, the romantic, idyllic perception of Indian village as unchanging and peaceful is destroyed. And instead, Devi provides an insider knowledge of power structures and the corrupt ways of socially and economically dominant classes of the Malik Mahajans. Shanichari, the protagonist, is not individuated, but she's firmly established as a representative of the lower caste, the Ganjus and the Dushats of Tahad village. As Anjum Katyal notes in her introduction, Mahashweta Devi uses methods of historicization to achieve this, to remove any kind of individuation of the central character. Right from the beginning, therefore, the story places the central character in her historical situation, provides a socio-economic context, and emphasizes that her problems are common to her class, caste, and gender. Hence, the narrative of the story moves swiftly. It's a very, you can finish reading the short story in 1 hour. And it lays bare the exploitation and oppression of the lower castes. The aim of Rudali, the short story, is to offer a critique of the nexus between the socio-economic and religious systems by establishing it as a reality and not as a fiction. So the harsh realities of poverty, exploitation, and death are exposed in brutal detail. And the movement of Shanichari from the exploited one to the empowered one works as the organizing principle for the short story. But the film, when we watch the film, Rudali, it is set in a small village in Rajasthan along the lines of the story and directed by the feminist director Kalpana Lajmi. It is faced with the challenge of combining concerns of the art cinema with elements of the mass appeal of Hindi films. So it thus tries to be a work that is political, yet attempts to reach a wider audience. So Dimple Kapadia, who plays the protagonist Shanichari, won a national award for her role in this film. The film also features Raki Gulzar, Raj Babbar, and Amjad Khan in one of his last films, because Amjad Khan died before the film's release, and the film is dedicated to him. So the film won many accolades. Samir Chandra won National Film Award for Best Art Direction, and Simple Kapadia won the National Film Award for Best Costume Design. The public recognition placed the film in the category of a popular classic cult status in Indian cinema, like Mirch Masala, a similar story of empowerment of the exploited by Ketan Mehta in 1987. The film Rudali taps into the short story's aim at creating the effect of realism by introducing the mud-patched, dilapidated huts of the Dushats and the Ganjus. Shot mostly on the location in the Jaisalmer region of Western Rajasthan, it features authentic regional costumes and props along with the local dialect. The short story's major concern to establish itself as reality and not as fiction is achieved through historicization, which I already spoke about. And Shanichari, but in the film, Shanichari is not historicized, but presented as a heroine, by individuation through physical or psychological description through the cinematic images. And the cinematic apparatus, on the other hand, individuates Shanichari through the same means that are omitted in the text, by choosing a well-known actress like Dimple Kapadia, who cannot be just a representative, but a heroine, and by offering many close-up shots of hers to record her emotions and feelings. All the incidents that occur in the film are around Shanichari rather than her community's life. So this is one major difference. The first close-up shows us an old, tired Shanichari who is recounting her tale to Bikini, a Rudali from a neighboring village. And as Bikini's role is played by Rakhi Gulzar, another prominent Hindi actress, audience can guess that there will be an important relationship between the two, which is a drastic variation from the story as it is presented in the film. But although story's realism is not a visually, pliable one, its journalistic prose leaves enough space to the film's conventions of portrayal, as also the cultural expectations of Bollywood and pan-Indian, audience as well. So the opening of the film, which focuses on the locale and it gradually unfolds the poverty and struggles of Shanichari's life in a realistic manner. But the film aims at social realism with its ideological bent of exposing class, caste, and gender hierarchies. It deviates slightly as it introduces three, actually the short stories concentration is on exposing caste and gender hierarchies. And though Mahashweta Devi highlights class hierarchy as the aim of her short story, but there are three important turns the film attempts, which are problematic in this adaptation, and which will put this text, whether we can talk about it later, whether it can be considered an intertext or just an adaptation or an appropriation. But the three important turns, I will quickly go through it. I know I am given, I think, half an hour or 25 minutes.
25 minutes.
25. And how much time do I have?
5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. The three turns, and then I'll come to conclusion. The three interesting turns in the film, which are not found in the short story, are the romantic scene involving Shanichari and Thakur Lakshman Singh, the revelation at the end of the film that Bikini is Shanichari's mother, which is not there in the short story, and the last, Shanichari's initiation into the tradition of Rudali. Rudali as traditional mourners. And in the short story, Mahashweta Devi elevates them to professional mourners, where they can dictate terms and call shots, which is not achieved in the film. So the first turn, the romantic scene between Lakshman Singh and Shanichari, occurs within the first 1 hour. And the meeting is portrayed in a proper cinematic manner, where against the backdrop of golden sands with a village beauty and a young Thakur in a colorful turban descending from a camel is a picture perfect cinematic prop that occurs frequently in Hindi films and to which the audience is tuned to. And the platonic love felt by both Shanichari and Lakshman Singh is conveyed through the famous melodious, haunting song Dil Goon Goon Kare, sung by Shanichari on the night of Lakshman Singh's son's naming ceremony. And the problematic aspect of this scene is, given the socio-economic context in which both the characters exist, the platonic love and the restraint, shown by them, pitch the plight of women like Shanichari at a different level. In a world where women from lower castes are constantly used and abandoned to become prostitutes, the love affair seems improbable. Now, one can, however, understand that the romantic angle can be plausibly constructed according to the aesthetic conventions of cinema in the process of becoming popular. And Lakshman Singh, as it is played by one of the major actors at that time, Raj Babbar, has to be shown as progressive and also has enough patience to wait for Shanichari, but not so progressive when he overrules his wife's decisions. Also, when he proposes to Shanichari, it is very clear that it is for mainly sexual pleasure and not in any kind of emotional, romanticized, love affair. In the short story, the meeting between long lost playmates, Bikini and Shanichari, has the potential of a very highly sentimental, emotionally charged union, and a fictional construct is brought in to suit the ideological agenda of the author in the story, as Shanichari and Bikini team up to build an organization of Rudalis. Thus, a casual part-time occupation where they don't have any choice turns into an organized profession for marginalized women. Besides, there is the character of Dulan Ganju in the story, who acts as who is given political agency to initiate more and more women into Rudali as a profession, Rudalis as profession, not as exploited, by the Thakurs. The role of Dulan as Shanichari's moral guardian and confidant is replaced by the character of Bikini in the film. But by doing this, the director has saved some screen space, but has also given a role to another female character to make it more, feminist. Bikini prompts, but the major difference in calling this a feminist text is that it does not take the women characters who are exploited towards empowerment, as it happens in the short story. So Mahashweta Devi uses death as a metaphor to show the class struggle and predicament of the poor, and death for the rich becomes another occasion to display their wealth and power, but for the poor, it becomes another means to push them down, as shown both in the film and in the story. And tears are a luxury for the poor, and they cannot spend them in vain without getting anything in a remuneratory form like rice, clothes, as shown, as was the custom. So Kalpana Lajmi keeps the primary theme of death and poverty, in fact, in the film, but gives it a tinge of feminism as Shanichari stays away from the luring, comfortable life of Haveli, and also speaks against the priest Mohanlal in the film. And there is a powerful scene when Shanichari calls him a dalal who tries to make money by situating himself between the poor and the rich. So amidst all the struggle and poverty, it is the women trying to hold their ground, both in the film and the short story. But though Shanichari's experiences have the colors of her class and community, it is not the same as the men folk, which is brought out in both the story and the film. But where it makes a transformation from ideology to aesthetics, I would like to situate the story in the ideological realm, whereas the film tries to move beyond the ideological realm to aesthetic realm by using all these cinematic devices. Though Devi and Kalpana Lajmi's creations are highlighted here, Usha Ganguly's adaptation of the play can also be brought in to take adaptation to the next level, the intertextual level, But it's not possible in half an hour's time to look into all the 3 texts. So I confined myself to the 2 texts, that too in a very, I can say at a surface level. I couldn't go deep into the analysis. But there is a tremendous sense of drama in the stylized sequence where the Rudal is performed, both in the film and the play. But it does not include any irony in the film as well as in the play, but it is there in the short story. And that makes all the difference to distinguish these two as adaptations. But they are not appropriations in the real intertextual way, because Mahashweta Devi's text is born out of her activism days, from her own experience with the tribal people. And so there is, unlike Shakespeare's play, where you can keep tracing the antecedent text, there is not much scope except the oral songs or ballads that are sung, which can be looked at as intertext. So a kind of these adaptations, literary adaptations, work both for teachers and for students in a classroom situation, though we may not be able to bring in all theoretical discussions in the classroom situation. It helps us to move beyond the conventional boundaries of text. So I would like to end with that. Thank you very much. I hope I have confined to the time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next speaker, Dr. Joshi,
Yes, sir.
so that we can have
Next
some discussion at the end, if
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
possible. So
Sure, sir.
please keep your questions which you may have for Dr. Shobha for the end,
Yes.
so that we
Yes.
can have one common discussion with all the
Yes.
speakers. So may I invite Dr. Somali Gupta to present her.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And indeed, it was a pleasure listening to Dr. M. Shobha. In fact, I forgot what all I had to say and how I had to begin. So I'll begin with thanking the organizers, especially the rector and the dean, Faculty of Doctoral Studies and Research of Shri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya, the chairperson today, Dr. K. N. Guru Prasad, all the organizers, and a special thank for Madam Shilpa Phadnis, who took all the pains to invite me and be constantly in touch with me. So with that, I begin my deliberation on this fascinating topic of language and literature for lifelong learning and quality education. Why I call it fascinating is, the last bit of it, quality education. I was wondering that who is it who's going to decide the benchmark on what is quality education? I think I'm coming from the premise that NAC calls quality education, and we are also caught up with all the assessments that quality education has actually started to mean very differently from what it meant earlier, what education was, the whole purpose of education was earlier. And today we are just going to pile on and on and on in the name of teaching, in the name of development, in the name of giving a student a very wholesome personality, and we keep calling it a quality education. So drawing a little bit from the meta theme that has been stated in the very title of the conference today, I'm going to talk on the more interesting part, interesting for me, of course, which is lifelong learning from literature. So my focus is a little bit, taken out from the meta theme. And we all know, because as a student of and a teacher of literature, I would say a student of literature, because when you study literature, you do remain a student of literature lifelong. So as a student of literature, we very recently experienced how it has helped to sustain us. And especially during the pandemic period, when the earlier literature that was written on the pandemic helped to sustain us, gave us a kind of hope. And there was literature written during the pandemic, which gave us a kind of release from the stress that was getting built up because of the lockdown. So in a way, we cannot deny the kind of impact or the kind of role that literature plays in our lives in terms of sustaining us, in terms of giving us release. And it's always been there, you know, to kind of hold us together in the world of fantasy, to give us a kind of a realm where we could easily move around in whichever way we wanted to. It was our rabbit hole. It was our breaking the glass house and getting into the wonderland of Alice. So literature provided us with that kind of a comfort. Literature has always been there. And like I said, during the pandemic, when we were reading the writings by Jack London, The Scarlet Plague, or by Albert Camus, The Plague, or even Homer, if people have gone back and, you know, studied literature a little bit of the classical period, they would know that even in Homer's Iliad, he has made references to plague during the first two cantos, where Troy was ravaged by the plague. And this kind of, gave us a shared human experience to know that if people could sustain it, then we can also make it now. So our predecessors have made it through, and such difficult times when we did not have so much as means in terms of medical or being in touch with each other, if we could make it then, our predecessors could make it then, we can make it now. So there was hope. There was hope that was getting built up. And I think literature had a major, major role to play in this. And when I was listening to Dr. Thorat was talking about two things, and he particularly mentioned, you know, that quality education comes through, and lifelong learning comes through change and development after formal education. I just can't agree with him more in this particular area. And looking at this lifelong learning, my whole thesis of today's talk is going to be around literature that makes us reflect on the past. And that's why I have actually given the title of Reflective Narratives to my talk. And we are going to look at biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. I think these are the three exchangeable genres. They actually belong to one whole family, where people are talking about their past, talking about their lives, and sharing it with us. And we will go through the what, why, and how, because these are important questions to be answered if we want to really understand how lifelong learning happens. So reflective narratives in terms of biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs, they undertake to tell us the story of the author's life. If it is told by he himself or herself, then it's an autobiography, or it's a memoir, or if told by somebody else, it's simply a biography. But the purpose remains the same, which is to share. And the whole story of the life is constructed in a way where the personal development is given the historical, social, and a cultural framework. Some can look at it like an, aerial view from the top. And some, of course, look at it as a narcissist syndrome, where the author really likes to look at himself through the Venetian mirror and find and be fascinated with what he's seeing. And then the urgency comes to talk about it. Many of the autobiographies that we have today are not written by literati. In fact, somewhere, we have merged the lines of literati and non-literati. So people from literature are becoming politicians, and politicians are writing autobiographies. So, it's just not by literati anymore. And the other thing is that earlier, we always thought that autobiographies are going to be written by people who are old, people who have had a lifetime's experience and then would like to tell about it. But now it's not so anymore. I mean, people in their 30s, people in their 40s would like to reflect back and tell the world, what is it that they're going through. So, and it's quite natural, it's quite human, man has always tried to express his inner feelings, cravings, desires, and aspirations through the medium of art. I mean, even those cave paintings that he made, were an expression of himself as to what he did, whether he fought a bull or a bison. He wanted to come and draw it. So, since time immemorial, he loved to tell stories about himself, on his environmental surroundings, on the people that he lived with, and the desire to express oneself and the urge to reveal the world within that existed within him. It had universal connotations, and this can be seen from the earliest times of civilization. So whenever we think of man telling a story, we have this image of a man sitting, and there is a fire burning and people sitting around him and listening to his story. And autobiography is one such storytelling where the man who speaks is the hero himself. Autobiography is nothing but a story. It's a story of an individual's journey in this world, and which he narrates for the world to read and the world to know him the way he wants the world to know him. Now, this is important. When he is writing an autobiography, let's not think that it's so objective as it should be, rather. But then, it's a way, I'm going to come to this again later, but it is exactly the way he wants the world to see him. He takes advantage of the art's shaping powers. The art, when you're writing, it's an art form. So, if it's a painting, the man would like to add a little bit of extra muscle, which is not there. So if I have my painting done, I would like to look a little more beautiful, cut and trim a bit. So, so that is there, so art has the power of shaping. And in the effort to transmute the incoherence that has existed while living, when you're going through a life, we don't make a lot of sense out of it because we don't know the future. The past has just happened, and living in the present with the repercussions of whatever has happened in the past, there is a lot of incoherence. You don't make sense out of life. So when you're writing the autobiography, this incoherence becomes more and more coherent. Okay, and you put it down into the regularities of a story, and that's why I'm calling it a storytelling. So autobiography becomes a very coherent story of a hero who himself is the narrator. And just like any other story, it involves the process of selection, rejection, for proper distribution of facts, emphasis on certain aspects of life, etc., and so on and so forth. So in the last few years, we have seen autobiographies from businessmen, celebrities, politicians, servicemen, sportspersons, all highlighting their achievements and secrets of their lives. And readers have been lapping it up, People are writing because more and more they find that readers are fascinated to read about the private lives of a little well-known people, their secrets, their beliefs, their convictions, intentions, interests, all of these things, it engrosses the readers because the reader then feels the privilege of being in that inner circle of the eminent person or the autobiographer. Now, where did this all begin from? Where did this entire genre of autobiography start from? During the Renaissance and the Reformation, of course, it happened before that also, as we'll see later. But primarily it developed as a genre in literature during the period of Renaissance and Reformation in Europe, when man discovered himself in a new way. And the individuality of the man was established, and in a way that has continued and has re-emphasized in the modern day today. And especially in the post-industrial, after World War II, the post-industrial Western society, there was a threat on the man, and it demeaned the man. So many people died, so man was not seen as a very important thing. And this did not make the thinkers, the world thinkers, very happy. So consequently, the autobiographies of the great leaders came out, and once again, there was interest in the man on what he thought. There was a kind of an emphasis on his supremacy, and it was quite subjective. It made an inner probe into his mind as to how it worked, be it the famous politicians like Churchill or Hitler or whosoever. And people really wanted to know how things were happening and how one could reconstruct the life as a whole. Roy Pascal, he calls it a reconstruction of the movement of life or a part of life. That is what he calls autobiography. He defines autobiography as a reconstruction of the movement of a life or a part of a life in the actual circumstances in which it was lived. So the autobiographical form is concerned with the self and not in the external forces of the world. However, the outer world is taken into account as the selfhood is shaped and molded by these external forces. The autobiographical process takes place with the aid of autobiographical memory, because one has to remember, go back to the childhood and remember what happened in terms of feelings to the autobiographer to be able to write that. So the self-narrative that is written, it does not only ask the question, who am I? It also answers the query, how did I become what I am? What are the processes that happened? What are the influences that made me what I am today? In terms of, let us say, looking at the word autobiography, James Onley also breaks the word autobiography. He says, auto means self, which is I, bios is the life, and graphy is the act of writing. The act of writing here is the most important part, because it is through writing that the self and life, that is the autos and the bios, take specific dimension and image. So, as I said, it did not just start after the Second World War. It didn't start, during the Renaissance or the Reformation. Autobiographies were written way before that. And Augustine wrote in his Confessions, and between 397 and 400 AD, he called it Confessions. And it's a work which recorded his moral development and spiritual journey. And it was a self-analytic document and a record of the great power, how, his mind, this great and powerful mind of Augustus, it was undergoing religious conversion. So it was written in the form of a person taking a journey and coming back, moving away and then getting back. So journeying and returning, it became one of the motives of autobiographies even today. And today, when we look at the autobiographies that are around us, this whole story seems to be around becoming. How did I become what I am? How am I in this position today as you see me? So, he's writing about himself, but in a way he's objective enough to look at himself as though it's another person writing about him. And it comes from a great deal of conviction that people are going to be interested in reading what he has to say. For an autobiographer, there is something called a truth that he wants to tell the world. And this is factual truth. And this factual truth about himself is something that he wants to share with the world. And in this way, he presents a dialogue which he has within himself. And that is why it sounds convincing. That is why it sounds good enough to be taken by the readers. And then this becomes a kind of a narrative which has the affirmation of the man, let's say, and who's looking at his innermost self and finding fidelity there. When he's writing about his childhood or he's writing about his adolescence and recreating scenes, he's just not trying to repeat the scene. He's actually trying to give it a new perspective. And it is an enactment of a drama, of the life of a man, and who's actually trying to reassemble the facts that happened there. But you have to remember that this person is now no more a child or an adolescent. He's almost like crossed his prime. So to be able to go back and look there, it is just a movement going back. He's just recreating that part, and it will almost have a perspective that he has now in his older age, which he tries to put it in his younger times. So there will always be a certain there will be a certain gap. And we're going to come to that in the last part of my talk, in which we'll try to understand the autobiography through the structuralist or the deconstructionist way, where Barth, talks about death of the author. So autobiographies then are the documents about the life of a person. He's the historian of his own life, and he's the only person who can check its accuracy. And especially when it comes to literary writers, when they write their biographies or their autobiographies, they try to project an image that they wish to project. So this is where the little gap comes. The author tries to reconstruct his life, reconstruct using all the narrative devices and restrictions, and like accuracy, impartiality, and inclusiveness. And it is not merely a recapitulation of the past. It is an attempt by the autobiographer to reconstruct himself to his own likeness, what he wants to be. So the autobiographical practice is a process of inner assimilation and is usually undertaken much later in life. The earlier ones that come are often dismissed as being quite presumptuous. So the emergence of autobiography as a literary genre and critical term thus coincides with what has frequently been called as the emergence of the modern subject around 1800. Autobiography evolved as a genre in non-fictional yet constructed autodiegetic narration, wherein the self-reflective subject inquires into his or her identity in its developmental trajectory. The autobiographer looks back to tell the story of his life from the beginning to the present, tracing the story of its own making, and as Nietzsche's words, how one became what one is. So the major motives that we have in autobiographies today are journeying and return, just like in Confessions. We have answers to the questions, how did I become what I am? There is a voyage to inner self-discovery. People also talk about life with a difference, and there is alienation and search for identity. A little while ago, I was talking about the structuralists and deconstructionists like Barth. They have often raised their voices over the complete extinction of the author's personality. Barth says that once a writer writes a book, the author is dead. We can't find him. But does that happen with autobiographies? So the complete extinction of an author's personality from his created work. So will the death of an author annihilate the author's biography also from the text? Now, this is completely antithetical to the romantic cult of narcissism, where one is totally obsessed with self. So in modern criticism, it's very difficult to analyze an autobiography and say that the author is not there. Yet, if we are to follow Eliot's tradition and individual talent, that no writer or no author can just claim that the whole glory, calling it his original work. There is always the pastness of the past, which is so important. So if we look at tradition and individual talent, if we look at the structuralists, then we have to agree that the autobiographical story, as it is formed now, is not completely or wholly the story of the autobiographer. He has to acknowledge what has been written before him and after him, and how he is just a part of the whole loop. Talking about biographies and autobiographies, I would like to really talk about a few biographies and autobiographies which stand out as different. And out of that, if we take a look at modern literature that is being written, the entire Dalit literature is autobiographical. In fact, what is not being written by a Dalit is not considered to be Dalit literature anymore. So if anybody else is writing, it's not Dalit literature. And what has been written so far, 99% of it are autobiographies or memoirs or biographies of the Dalit writers. So whether it is Kalyani Charal, Ami Kano Charal Likhi, or Bama's Karuppu, or Urmila Pawa's The Weave of My Life, they're all either biographies or autobiographies. So the major works come from there. These actually make very compelling stories for us to understand how the society has worked. We are talking about history. Of course, all the autobiographies give us a glimpse of the history. All the autobiographies tell us how the societies have worked and what has actually formed the man who has written this autobiography. So that way, if you look at it, we learn so much from autobiographies, much more than we can ever learn from history. So Dalit literature is one which makes a very compelling story. The Wings of Fire by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam actually tells us that what really struggle means, and yet with all what you don't have, you can still make it to where you want to make it, to the highest seat of a nation. Stories by the literati, when it comes to, I have two authors in mind. I mean, other than the Dalit writers, I have Kamla Das and I have Neeraj C. Chaudhary. Kamla Das, in her story, she writes about what is it to be a woman and the sufferings that she went through as a girl. And that was something that everybody could relate to, connect with. And hence, you know, her story made such a huge impact on the readers. Autobiography of an Unknown Indian, perhaps the most controversial of the autobiographies, is more of a political document, and especially the second part of his autobiography, which is Thy Hand Great Anarch, a voluminous book, talks about the entire political system of India as it existed then. And to see it from somebody who is who has a complete mind of his own. And Chaudhary, I'm fascinated with, because yes, my research is on Neeraj C. Chaudhary. And that is why I went through these books and I found it fascinating, not only because of the hold he has on the language, but also the lens with which he looked at the entire struggle for freedom, which the country was going through. And he gave me a new perspective to look at, a fresh vision to look at things through his eyes. And then, of course, we have Mahatma Gandhi's The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Other than that, in terms of biographies, if I look at, very recently, I was involved in a research of the Kalapani diaspora, in which the indentured laborers who were taken after the abolition of slavery to work in various parts of the world, their lives were told in their biographies, and it made a wonderful reading in terms of knowing what happened and how it happened. Because as a country, while we exalt the achievements of many of our many of the diasporic Indians, these diasporic Indians are forgotten by our own countrymen. We don't really talk much about them. And very few writers also write about them who don't belong to the Kalapani diaspora, Amitav Ghosh being one of them. Rest of the authors, they also don't write much about these people. But what was the kind of life that these people read? So these biographies gave me an insight into the lives of these people. And trust me, when I read that they really don't like people talking about, their lives as to how they led it, it made sense, because it was not a life of dignity. It was not a life that anybody would actually want to live. The oldest Indian biography would be perhaps Babarnama, written by Babur somewhere around 1483 and 1530. It speaks about his life and how he saw the world around him when he came here, an insight into the literary, the intellectual, and the cultural world that existed then in India. History again doesn't talk about this, but Babarnama does. Eco Homo, the autobiography of Nietzsche, which is how one becomes what one is. It talks about Eco Homo is actually, it has a biblical reference of Christ. Just before his crucifixion, he was shown that here is the man whom we are going to crucify. So Nietzsche, just before he went completely insane and died in 1990, in 1888, he wrote Eco Homo, and he said, here I am. He wanted the world to know him as he is. And what he writes is, he says, this is me, and don't mistake me for somebody else. This is what I am. So his autobiography, he speaks about his own self. Beyond this, there is one book. I mean, I would not be fair in talking about biographies and autobiographies if I don't mention this book, at least, is A Diary by a Young Girl by Anne Frank. We all know about this book. We have heard about it. We have read about it. We have read many of us must have read it too. It was not meant to be an autobiography. It was not meant to be a biography. It was meant to be a document of what is happening. It was meant to be an expression of relief or release from the stress that a young girl must have gone through. And today it stands as the most valid testament to the atrocities of the Nazis. So in my I would say, when I was doing a little bit of research around the autobiographies now, I realized that two myths have got busted over the period of time. The first myth is because autobiographies had such a Western format, and it was seen more as a Western thing to do, because Westerners are seen as very much extroverts. You know, they are the people who talk about themselves. Indians are seen as the Eastern people are seen as introverts. They are more into self, Atma and Atman and Aham Brahmasmi. So we are not very comfortable talking about ourselves. So it was seen as a Western concept, writing autobiographies, but now it's become so Indian. And the question, the first myth that got broken was that, the question that was asked, can Indian writers also indulge in soul searching, or is it the domain of Western writers only? No, it's not the domain of Western writers anymore. It's definitely has become as much Eastern as it is Western, especially after people find it a way to reveal what they want to reveal to the world, like Karan Johar does, or has done for that matter. And the second, of course, is a typical gender-based thing, where can women also luxuriate in the self-revelation, or is it a privilege of the man only? Again, that myth being broken, as if you can see, the Dalit writings are all, amongst all the writings, we have as many women writers as there can be. So what are these autobiographies? How do they help us? Why is it that there are so many takers for it? Now, if you really look at, there's a huge market of self-help.
Ma'am, excuse me, can we have a little time check, Dr. Anurag Joshi?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. If possible, please conclude, ma'am.
Yes, I'm concluding. I'm in the last part of it.
Sure.
The last part of it.
Yeah, please,
Sure.
ma'am.
So if you go to Amazon, you're full of self-help books. But if you pick up one book, which is an autobiography, it can help you far more. It helps us far more than the rest of the self-help books. It's easier to learn from the mistakes of others. It is easier to learn from what other people have written about themselves. They have already walked the path. So it's easier for us to walk the path. So we don't read an autobiography just to collect facts about that person. We read autobiographies because we want to learn from the mistakes that those people have made. Thank you very much. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. You will stay with us for discussion at the end, and we go to the next speaker, Dr. Amitabh. Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi, see that? Yeah. Please go ahead, Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi.
Yeah, I'm
Dr. Amitabh, are you sharing the screen?
I have a PPT. And how much time I have? Yes, how much time I have?
Okay, this is visible. Now you can go ahead. Dr. Amitabh, your slides are visible. Please go ahead.
I think my network is low. That's why. Yes, I hope like
voice is choppy.
Sir, your voice is not coming.
Your voice is not okay. Your audio is not okay. Please.
I hope now
Sir, your audio is not okay.
The slide
Audio
is
is
visible
not
now.
okay.
title of my presentation, I'll be
So your
Sir,
network
are
is
you
not
using
clear.
two devices?
Sexuality
Please use one device, otherwise the audio will not be okay.
course. No. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can
Yes,
hear you.
yes, go ahead.
Audible?
Dr. Amitabh, please use one device only, then only the audio will come.
Uh, Let me start with quality and
Dr. Joshi, can you
this
please call
course.
him and tell him to use
Yes,
one
sir.
device?
Yes, sir.
Because he's using multiple devices and that's
Yes,
why
sir.
the
This
audio
is
is
a
not
problem.
okay.
But it's not coming properly.
Taking into consideration both the language as well as
Started it.
the perspective. Education is not what is text actually. So this text and how do we perceive a text? So, we have our concern is on our concern is not on the printed article form side. So I got the aspect we associated
Hello?
with
Huh,
text.
huh,
We
huh.
have this etymology. That's there's a phone call. Hello. Am I audible? Huh. No. वापस में ब्रॉडबैंड कर रहा हूँ हाँ तो अच्छा अच्छा अभी कनेक्ट कर रहा है वो अब तो कनेक्ट हो गया है तो अब सुन पा रहे हैं अच्छा अच्छा तो क्या करूँ मैं हाँ अब आ रहा है ठीक है ना सुन पा रहे हैं हाँ कैन यू मी आवाज आ रही है ओके ओके फाइन तो हो सकता है कि वो माइक्रोफोन ढंग से लगा नहीं था So, but I hope like now I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Uh,
Please start.
Dr. Joshi, me now. Clearly?
शिल्पा टेल सर कि एक बार वो
Give me a
एग्जिट
signal
करके
whether I am
फिर से
audible.
आए
हाँ,
शायद
शायद
तब-
उससे
Okay.
हाँ एक
Okay,
बार
okay.
एग्जिट करके फिर से
So, okay. Okay, fine. Thank you. So, I'll talking about these three things: sexuality and discourse in this conversation. And
Sir, you please exit and then join again. Please exit and join again. Close all your screen and join again.
Okay.
ये थोड़ी होता है कि किसी को भी दे दो पकड़ा तो ऐसे थोड़ी होता है। नहीं
Dr. Joshi, will you be joining?
Yes, sir. शिल्पा मैम एक बार प्लीज. हाँ.
चलो I've promoted him as a panelist.
Okay.
Sorry for this interruption, and I hope now I'm audible as well as you can
Yes.
see.
Yes, sir. Visible.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Fine.
You're audible. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, please. Let me share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Not yet, sir. Now it's visible.
Okay, now it's visible.
Yes.
So I'll be talking on these three topics: text, textuality, and discourse. And my perspective is both linguistics and literature. So you can find it quite interesting that how things that we read and how a deeper meaning we can get if we have a linguistic knowledge of the text. So this we can see in this entire text, starting from what is a text. So we have different definitions associated with text, and one definition tells us like text is something that is physical. Another definition says like text is something that has content in it. But at the same time, these physical form or these physical definitions describing physical form, they are not that important. Then what is the solution? The solution is from the etymology, and we have a Latin word textus. The meaning is tissue or literary style, and we have another Latin word texture, and that means a woven. So here these two information, Latin etymology related to verb and the noun textus, they comes into help and try to understand like text is like a fabric. So because this tissue is associated to a fabric, and literary style is like words, they are woven like a fabric. So when we look at a page, a piece of paper, we find like particularly when it comes to English, Hindi, or most of the languages that people speak across the globe, we find like we write from left to right and top to bottom. So these words are woven actually. They create a fabric. So we need to understand if you want to go for the meaningful of a text, because meaningfulness of a text, a good text is never exhausted. So a classic is a classic because meaningfulness is not exhausted. So it is, we find multiple layers of meaning in that. So that thing is quite important, and I will try to show you like how you can find more multiple layers of meaning in a text, because most of us are dealing with teaching, research, writing papers. So if we do not find multiple meanings in a text, then we are not contributing academically better than the ordinary, because otherwise interpretation of a text, analysis of a text will simply become a paraphrase of the text, and that should not happen. So this is one thing that we have. At the same time, where can we find a text? So obviously the answer is like a text is situated in a context. So what comes before and after a text is context. So that is basically the meaning that is associated. And at the same time, I said like two perspectives I will take into consideration: literature and linguistics. Now, when I talk about these three things, literature, language, and linguistics, then there is a point, there is an argument posited by Faninandy Saussure, the founder of modern linguistics, and in his book titled Course in General Linguistics, published in 1917, he talks about spoken is primary and writing secondary. So we all know that first we have learned how to speak, and then later on, joining some formal institution, we have learned how to write. So if we extend this, spoken is primary and writing secondary, to literature, then we can say that language is primary, literature secondary. Because if we do not have any language, then we do not have literature, whether it is a oral literature or a written literature. So when it comes to literature, then we know there is a textual form, and that textual form has a literary style that is perfectly woven using specific words. And literature is an object of study, because we study as a discipline in different courses like BA Honors, MA, PhD, or any other courses. Language, the medium of the text, but it is also an object of study. For example, like someone is studying like a spoken course in French language, or let's say any other course in a particular language. And linguistics, that is also a discipline, but it becomes the meta language, because we use language to say something about language. So here these three things are important, and that is the part of my construction, my presentation. Now I talked about like how text is woven. I will give you one example to find out how text is woven. And already I have discussed that literature has a textual form and object of study. So I've taken into consideration a sonnet by Shakespeare. It's quite a famous sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and thou art more lovely and more temperate? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer leaves hath all to short and wet. Likewise it goes. So here I have taken two lines, the initial two lines of this sonnet, and I have taken the perspective of Faninandy Saussure. Because the Faninandy Saussure's book, The Course in General Linguistics, is basically a philosophical treatise on language. So there are 2 points mentioned by Faninandy Saussure, and these are basically semantic relations like syntagmatic and paradigmatic. So when we look at the text, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, we know that Shakespeare could have used, shall I compare thee to a spring morning, or Shakespeare could have written, thou art more beautiful and more calm. But actually, the sonnet is, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate. So that means like we have a syntagmatic relationship, like one word is interacting with another word is interacting with another word. And likewise, we have a pattern. We have a pattern, and this pattern is perfectly fine. Now, this pattern is not accidental, because I am not a believer of the theory Wordsworth talks about, like spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Because when you write a poem, particularly a poem that has rhyme scheme, particularly that has a particular form, then obviously it is not spontaneous. It is like very well crafted thing. Like you need to contemplate it, you need to edit it, modify it again and again. So here we have a fine syntagmatic relationship. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day? We know, like in English language, like a question starts with either WH or an auxiliary and ends with a mark of interrogation. So here, like it is a perfect question. But again, we need to consider, like this is not a question of inquiry. Shakespeare is not asking this question to his readers, like shall I compare thee to a summer's day? But it is a rhetorical question. So it is like Shakespeare is raising this question, and at the same time, Shakespeare is providing the answer in the following lines: thou art more lovely and more temperate. So likewise, we can see that this is a syntagmatic relation that we have, and syntagmatic relation, according to Farinandi Sassiu, and as we see, it falls on the horizontal axis. So left to right horizontal axis, we find like how this relationship takes place. At the same time, we have paradigmatic relationship as well. So these relationships, they actually fall on two axes, like you have x-axis and you have this y-axis. So this x-axis, y-axis, x-axis is vertical, y-axis is horizontal. On horizontal, you have this syntagmatic relationship. On paradigmatic, you have this vertical relationship. So this is not the case, like these relationships, because these are language relationship, semantic relationship, meaning relationship. And we read literature to find out more meaning. So some people, they read literature to get the meaning of life. And we have the various definition of literature as well. Some people say like literature is a mirror of society, literature is a reflection of life, this and that. And literature is not possible if we do not have language. So in order to understand more meaning, or in order to get more meaningfulness from a literary text, then it is important to understand the philosophy of language and what are the relations that govern language, and we can apply those to a literary text as well. So when I talk about these semantic relationships posited by Farinandi Sassiu, then we need to understand that these two relationships, paradigmatic and syntagmatic, they fall at different level. Like at sound level, cat is cat because cat is not sad, sat is sad because sat is not mad. At a stylistic level, let's say a student is writing a poetry, a rhyme scheme like sun is shining bright. This is a lovely sight. So very well we know, like bright is rhyming with sight. So again, we have a relationship. We have a relationship of contrast and substitution, that okay, sight word will be more appropriate when we are using the word bright, because it will rhyme with bright, as well as brightness has something to do with sight. And the syntagmatic relationship is the combination and co-occurrence restriction. So like the cat sat on the mat. So it is not like the sat, the cat, mat on the. So we are very well aware of. So this relation, these two semantic relationships, they govern not only the language, but literature as well. So basically, when we try to understand text, when we try to understand the textuality is basically the quality of the text. So ITY suffix is basically the quality, electricity, quality of being electric. So this ITY suffix is important here, because the textuality is basically what makes a text. That is quite important. So when I say that syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship, basically I'm talking about that I have hundreds and thousands of words if you take into consideration a novel. I have few thousand words if I take into consideration a short story. I have few hundred words if I take into consideration a long poem. And those words are arranged in such a manner that a classic becomes a classic. That is the end of the story. So we need to understand, we need to study that how those words are arranged in a manner under or guiding by the principles of syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship. So we have one word, or one word can be understood as a sign interacts with another sign, and you have a continuum like this. So sign interacts with other sign. Here we have at horizontal level, but it also occurs at vertical level. And at one place in his book titled "The Course in General Linguistics," Asud also talks about like everything depends upon relations. Now this relationship, we also aware like how family is important for us, how society is important for us, how elders, how our colleagues are important for us. But how words they interact with each other, that is also important. So here everything depends upon relation is basically how one word interacts with another words. And another thing Sasur said, like signifier and signified are two sides of a piece of paper. It is like basically a paper is a paper because it has two sides. So similarly, if a word is not conveying anything to us, particularly when it comes to literature, then gradually it will become meaningless. So a word is a word because it is conveying something to us, and in particularly in literature, it is conveying so many things to us that we need to discover. Talking about how text is constituted, linguistically speaking, we start with the minimum, that is phoneme, and reaching to the maximum, that is sentence or discourse. Because beyond sentence is our discourse, and literature is not one sentence. Literature is like many sentences, hundreds and thousands of sentences, and it creates a discourse. So this is basically the structure that we can think of, like how a text is constructed, any text is constructed. So here with this example, I would like to show that though we have only two sentences, but a discourse is created. If we have only one sentence, then there is a possibility that discourse is not created. But beyond one sentence, linguistically, we larger unit than one sentence, we have a discourse. So I have taken this example from Halliday and Hassan Cohesion in English, and this is an example from the culinary and this cooking book, that wash and core 6 apple, put them in a bowl. Now here we have two sentences. So our knowledge of English language tells us like we have imperatives as well. We have different type of sentences. Here we have imperative, and imperative subjectless sentences generally we have. So there is nothing special about it. But the thing that makes these two sentences a discourse is like the dependency of the second sentence, an element that occurs in the second sentence upon the first sentence. For example, wash and core 6 apples that we have, and put them in a bowl. So who is this them, or what is this them? Then we need to cross the boundary. We need to cross this boundary, and we need to just find out the meaning in the previous sentence. So similarly, when we read literature, so we need to ask ourselves like, what is the relationship of line 13 to line 1? What is the relationship of line 14 to line 1? Or what is the relationship on page 51? Something is said by the character to the page 1. So this is basically, we are just asking the relationship in the one text. But if we extend this thing, then it will become intertextuality. Like we are jumping from one text to another, hopping from one text to another. So let's say Shakespeare wrote something about love, then there is a possibility that Boccaccio also wrote something about love. So how love is treated in Boccaccio, how love is treated in Chaucer, how love is treated in Shakespeare, how love is treated in Milton. And if we do like this, then basically it will become the example of intertextuality. We just jump from one text to another. And why do we jump? Why do we do this? Because we are going for referencing, we are going for allusions, and we want to enrich our interpretation more. So now, we are that what the text and how letting at some conceptual clarity that what is actually a text. But at the same time, anything is not a text. For example, Tolstoy, War and Peace, road sign stop, or colorless green ideas sleep furiously, or visiting relatives are annoying. So when we talk about like Tolstoy, War and Peace, now let's say a student has borrowed a book from you, titled Tolstoy's War and Peace, and you are continuously sending reminders that return my book, return my book. But what happens, like the student is not giving heed to you and not returning your book. So one fine day, you and student, you meet each other, student greet you good morning, and you said Tolstoy, War and Peace. So now the answer, how War and Peace will become the answer of good morning, is basically quite interesting. So here comes the role of context. Here comes the role of the context, that text will get meaning in context. So if you remove text from context, then the text will become meaningless. For example, a road sign is meaningful if it is a road sign. If road sign is in your store, then it is not meaningful. So in this context, Noam Chomsky, in his book titled Syntactic Structures, published in 1957, he talks about this famous phrase, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. And when we look at colorless green ideas sleep furiously, then we find that, okay, this sentence is perfectly grammatical, but it has no meaning. But let's say I'm teaching a language student linguistics to my students, then definitely it will become meaningful, because I'm teaching them that grammaticality is one thing and acceptability is another thing. So context here comes, and previously we have discussed in the very first slide that that text falls in between context. If we do not have context, then text has probably no meaning to us. So context is quite important, that where we try to locate the meaning of a text. That is quite important for us. Now the question arises, can text be decontextualized? For example, the first line from this famous novel, the boy's name was Santiago. Now here, this is an example of decontextualization, because this line actually occurred in in this novel, and this is the first line of this novel. But what I have done, because in this presentation I have just decontextualized this thing. So yes, the answer is yes, that we can decontextualize a text. It is very much possible. So text get meaning in a context, but at the same time we can decontextualize it. It's very much possible. Now, when we talk about these three things like text, context, and discourse, then there is a point mentioned by Stanley Fish that it is basically an anecdote, like, is there a text in this class? And is there a text in this class? And here he talks about actually that there are too many interpretations, but which interpretation is valid? It is a problem. For example, there is a poem like by William Black, Tiger, Tiger burning bright in the forest of the night. Now the problem is like there is a possibility that some student might interpret that it is a dietary problem, that a hunter has killed a tiger and consumed the meat of the tiger. Now this is also an interpretation. So what is the problem with this? The problem with this, like a hunter has killed a tiger and consumed the meat of tiger, and now there is a dietary problem, like there is a pain in the stomach. Now this type of interpretation is not valid. But who will decide? Like you and I will decide. Critics will decide. The author will decide. So we have interpretive communities. They actually validate. So context, that is one thing that is important. So when we interpret something, we need to keep in mind the context. First, we need to understand that we are dealing with a text that falls under some context. We need to find out the appropriate context. And we need to cross-question whether this interpretation will be validated or not. Because end of the day, we need to come out with an argumentative writing. So that is again a quite valid point that we have. So this is one thing, that text is one thing and a situation is another thing. So context precedes text, that we also need to understand. We have a text, but we have context, and that context precedes text. So something that is already with us. Context or situation is our experiences. That when we read a text, then we have all sort of permutation and combinations in order to find out whether it is meaningful, whether it is not meaningful. So the meaning of the word is its use in the language. So basically the use in the language, that is becomes the context, but the knowable context. I know some context. For example, when I say the tiger, tiger burning bright in the forest of the night is a dietary problem, there is a possibility that I am aware of this context. But all the interpretive communities, they are not aware of this context. So any context will not make eventually a text meaningful. Then what? Only the knowable context transform text into discourse. So that is quite important, that we need to understand that context precedes sentence, or let's say a text, but knowable context is quite important. So situational competence is more important than the lingual competence when we study literature, because reading literature is one thing, but getting out meaning of that reading, that is another thing. And that will happen when we have situational competence. So generally we have a saying that a man does not learn from his experiences, man learns from his suffering. So the thing is like the situational competence, like someone is learning from his suffering, that means that is a lifelong learning. So generally you will not learn from your experiences, but from suffering, then definitely you will learn a lesson. So that type of thing is like situational competence is more important. It is broad and lingual competence is quite narrow. So these are the points that we need to consider and keep in mind. And we have these interpretive communities, but there are certain writers, certain critics like Jacques Derrida, Bloom, then Stanley Fish. When they write, people complain that okay, I don't understand. So let's say you have a book, Grammatology by Derrida, and people say like, okay, I cannot read that book because this book is very difficult to read. It is very cryptic. Fine. Now the point is like, then what is the role of interpretive communities? Because it is not the complaint of one person, but thousands of people, they complain similar that the grammatology is like very cryptic. It is not Delphic. So the thing is like you have these writers who write in this manner, but M.H. Abrams says about these writers that generally these writers, they just overruled by the stubborn interpreters who imposed their own meaning. So Derrida imposed his own meaning, Bloom imposed his own meaning, then Stanley Fish imposed his own meaning. So that is the thing. Like those people, they impose their own meaning, but obviously there is some interpretive community who eventually passes their meaning or pass their meaning. Now I would like to demonstrate this one example, that you have this text and how you will analyze with the help of the knowledge of linguistics or the knowledge of language. So this text goes like this: Almighty God, our heavenly fathers, who of thy tender mercy, which is given thy only son Jesus Christ to suffer death upon the cross for redemption. So this is an excerpt from the text, and if I ask a student to write the meaning of this text, then the student will write, God gives his only son Jesus to save human beings, and he died for us. So that is all, but this is not sufficient. And if I say like, okay, what else you can say more, then the student will say, okay, besides this paraphrasing, I can say like, this text falls under liturgical prayer. This is a type of religious English. It is used in church service. But again, this is not all. Then what is the solution? The solution is like the knowledge of the language. For example, when we look at quite closely this text, we find so many things to say. For example, starting is with the vocative case. Where do we use vocative case? When we are talking to someone directly. So this is one message for us, that okay, when we talk to God, we do not require a mediator. So Almighty God is in the vocative case. Then next information is the capitalization of F and S. Though it is a convention that when you write a poem, a poetry, then generally the first letter is capitalized, but that is a convention. What is the information that we have? The information is like when we use F, capital F for father, capital S for son, that means we are not talking about biological relationship between father and son, but we are talking about a spiritual relationship. Let's say, who of thy tender mercy. Now, who of thy tender mercy is the inversion of the word order, because when we use present day English, we will say the tender mercy of whom, but here, who of thy tender mercy. So this word order inversion is also quite important. Then we have lots of archaic words like thy, thine, didst. What is the role they play in the text in terms of meaningfulness? Then we have lots of collocation and how they are associated with each other. So we need to focus on these things if we want to go for more meaningfulness. And when we have this meaning, so previously we had only this one sentence interpretation: God gives his only son Jesus to save human beings, and he died for us. But now when we are informed linguistically, then we have so many things to say. So we can say the text begins with a vocative expression that directly addresses God, by which the connection between the addressee and address is well established. Also, the inversion of syntax topicalizes God, because the topic of this is God. But this time it is substituted by the relative pronoun who. The archaic use of the past tense auxiliary didst establishes links, indicating that the prayer is quite ancient and has been used by our ancestors, and because of that, it is quite valuable for us, because all our religious texts, they are written centuries back, and that's why they are more important. And for us, the capitalization is an example of capitonym, which removes it from the biological relation and establishes heavenly connection. The use of thy and thine is also in line with Old English, but it has alliterative function as well, and the collocation is well suited for the religious prayer. So here, this is a demonstration that you have an understanding of a text, and you want to go for meaningfulness. Your aim is to find more meaning. Now, how you get more meaning? This is one example. Like, you can get more meaning if you have linguistically informed, then you have more meaning. Then we have talked about text. So we also know like there is a term like intertextuality coined by Julia Kristeva, and I have previously discussed that actually intertextuality is like jumping from one text to another, hopping from one text to another for more meaning. Then likewise we have other terms like architectuality by Janet. So architectuality is like conforms to the convention, like when Shakespeare writes sonnets or like when Chaucer writes Canterbury Tales, then definitely they are not the first person who is doing this. So Chaucer is following Boccaccio's tale, or let's say Shakespeare is following the tradition of Surrey and Watt. Fine. So that is the thing. Like architectuality is again they are following some convention of a particular tradition that we have, but at the same time they are not simply imitating, but they are also exploiting that particular convention. For example, if we read the line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" It is the first line of the sonnet, but here I can be read as the persona, the Shakespeare. So here, like they copy, they imitate, but they also add something of there. So this is quite important thing that we have when we read a text. Then what is the function? Then the function is like intertextuality is like we get lots of allusions, references, and it helps in the interpretation of the text. So again, like Shakespearean text is an example of an active transformation of another, a common way of how intertextuality works. So this is how I have discussed various things that are associated with text textuality and discourse. And I think because of the paucity of the time, I should, yes, this one important thing that I would like to discuss, because many students and researchers, they have a problem in understanding uh, when Derrida says like a text is a text of another text, or there is nothing outside the text. So generally they think like the textbook that they have, or the textbook I have, that has the entire meaningfulness. That is not. But actually Derrida is talking about the intertextuality. That is to say, like if you want to find out the meaning of the text, then you need to go to another fiction, because literature is generally fiction. A good literature is generally fiction. That's why in most of the cases, like people, critics, they won't consider autobiography as literature, because autobiography has personal and real elements in that. So this point is quite important, that textuality means that reference is not external reality, but actually that is to be found in another text or in the same text. So thank you all for your patient listening, and this is all. And I'm sorry that initially there was a problem in sharing and listening to you. That is all. Thank you all.
It's completely all right. So it's a part of online teaching and learning. Now house is open for question and answer. If you have any query related to like Shobha ma'am or Vikram sir and Somali ma'am's talk, you can put it into chat box or you can ask directly.
Yeah, I think we can have it directly if
Yes, sir.
everyone is on the mic.
Sure, sir.
To start with, I had one question for Dr. Shobha. You extensively talked about the adaptation of literary works to films in particular, taking Rudali as an example with a very extensive analysis which you did, which was very informative. But in general, what we see is that when a novel is adapted to a film and when a short story is adapted to a film, now this makes a huge difference to my mind, because often we hear that novels are not properly adapted when they are adapted to film, because novels are very extensive. Whereas short stories have a smaller content, and that is expanded in the film. So one gives scope for expansion, whereas another gives a scope for reduction to a large extent. For example, if we take, and sometimes the characters get differently depicted in the film. If I take two examples, one for Guide, for example, where the original book is quite different from the way it is picturized. In the same way, Godfather was another book which was much talked about. So what do you think about this, Dr. Shobha?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I think abridgment, reductionism, or expansion, all these depend on the director's perspective and what the director is trying to highlight. Even when you are trying to adapt a short story or a novel, they always work by scripts. They will do a screen write up and choose only those incidents, characters that can capture the theme. So adaptation will always refer to the original text. Original, again, very controversial, because going by the recent deliberations, there is no original text. Every text is a translation of another text in some way or the other. So it may not be always the case that a short story gets expanded on the bigger screen and a novel gets, reduced. Perhaps I was also thinking when you were asking these questions, in the case of classics, we feel so much is left out, and because we have also grown up reading classics. And when they are adapted into the film mode, whether it is Pride and Prejudice, Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, European classics or British classics, we always feel dissatisfied, because when you are reading novel on a bigger novel always has a bigger canvas, whereas the film has limited time. So there is a lot of scope for imagination in any kind of readerly text. So Dr. Amitabh was referring to some of the linguistic theories and Stanley Fish's essay. There are also different kinds of text, readerly text, writerly texts. Some films give the scope for the audience to continue with the text, and some films are closures. So it depends, even when you select certain incidents, characters from a novel and reduce it to 2.5 hours, a film can be totally satisfying in some ways and also dissatisfying in some ways. It depends on how the reader's satisfaction or the audience's satisfaction is also based on the audience's ideology or aesthetic requirement. Do you go to films mainly for aesthetic enjoyment, or do you go to films mainly for ideological satisfaction, or both? There are some films which meet both and some which do not. So I was also speaking in terms of classroom experience where it helped. One of our researchers also worked on film versions of classical novels and did a case study of interviewing. We are getting, especially at the both at UG and PG levels, students now don't want to read. And I think all of us are facing this problem and compare ourselves with their generation and think, because we were saved actually by smartphones and we didn't have anything else but to read. And today it's very difficult. I have been trying so much, and every year it is becoming more difficult to prompt students to read. Students who are basically oriented towards literature coming to literature classrooms. That is the case that I have seen. They are coming and choosing English MA or optional English at UG level, mainly for job opportunities. This is something which I am seeing the last 5 years. So we were using film texts as some means to make the students get familiar with, and some of them, I know the percentage is less. Some of them have gone back to literary texts. And but you are right when you say that, that novels get reduced. But sometimes it can also be deeply satisfying. I was thinking of Harry Potter series. from the cultural studies point of view, the film also is very satisfying in terms of capturing fantasy or the moral, ethical questions that are the difference between the, two different races, communities, whatever. There are some films, Godfather, for example. I think a Godfather film was more famous than the novel. So it is the film adaptations have also highlighted some novels. One more novel comes to my mind. The film adaptation Slumdog Millionaire. And Vikram Swarup's novel didn't get as much wide publicity as the film got. And I'm sure there are, I'm aware, when I make this statement, I'm also aware of the fact that there was a lot of politics, that it was a Western Hollywood production, and how they depict India and how it becomes very popular. But
Mic is off.
Please check your mic.
Ma'am, your mic is off,
Mic.
Shobha, madam.
okay. Did it happen just now, or?
Yeah,
Yes,
now.
just now.
It's okay.
Then
It's
I
okay.
think I have.
Yeah, just one more thing I had to say about what you were talking, because your talk was very interesting. When it comes to reading and when it comes to seeing a film, see, when you read a novel, then the characters which depicted in that novel, every reader has his own imagination about that character and his own perception about the character. But once it comes to your film, now this is the director's interpretation of the character, and it gets typified. Say, for example, you were giving the example of Rudali only. So now, is that character truly picturized as it was written in the novel, or it was different because the media is different? So you project the character in a different manner. This happened in Guide also, that you project a character in a different manner than what the original author might have got in their mind while writing the novel. So this is bound to happen when you change the media. Do you agree?
Yeah, sometimes yes, it happens. But you are referring to Guide. At the same time, Malgudi Days came very close to the text. So Swami and his friends. Yes.
Yeah, that is right. That's right. Some of them do come very
Correct.
close. Malgudi
Yeah, I
Days,
agree with you. I agree with you.
Malgudi Days were really, that was a TV serial, so it came very close to the. So it all depends on how the director, does he want to retain the originality of the text, or he wants to project it in a different way. Maybe sometimes the films become more appealing than the novel itself.
Yes.
Because of the
And,
presentation.
Yes. Yeah, you are right. And I was also thinking, aren't we readers also like directors when we are reading a text?
Absolutely.
Each
Absolutely.
reader imagines it differently.
Differently. Whereas once it comes in a film media, then it becomes a different thing. Because each reader cannot be a director, but a director can project because he knows the media and he knows how to project that.
Yes.
As a character.
And the many Ramayanas, as we are aware of Paula Richman's 2 volumes on questioning Ramayanas, and the many Ramayanas, and A.K. Ramanujan's essay on multiple Ramayanas. I was also, when you were asking, I was also thinking of them, how adaptations or even appropriations have been very, very useful. Yes, they are dissatisfying sometimes and satisfying sometimes, but they are, as a student of literature, I feel they are very important and significant because it gives rise to new text each time when we allow adaptation to happen.
Yeah, and we had another very interesting talk by Dr. Somali Gupta, especially on autobiographies and how they are depicted. But Madam Somali Gupta, autobiographies are usually written by the people who are successful Is that right?
Yes, I would
Mostly.
agree, and
Sorry.
mostly, yeah. And but right now, the crux of the matter is that autobiographies are being written not only by the literati, they are being
That's
written
true.
by
No,
everybody.
they may be successful in any field.
Yeah, they are
Like
successful.
like you
It's
said,
Andre
in
Agassi
business.
writing, it's
Yeah,
Karan Johar writing.
yeah.
It's
I mean, it may be film, it may be business,
yeah,
or it may be science or something. That they are famous. I
they're
mean, they are
successful people.
succeeded in their own field,
Yes,
and
sir.
then people would like to know about their background and how when they become very successful. So it is
Yes,
always written like that. You
yes, sir.
also touched upon history, for example.
Right, sir.
You were talking about Babar Nama, and anyway, there are
Yeah.
many namas like that. Hyder
Yes,
Nama
sir.
is another one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is
Abdul
quite written. So historical accounts
Yes, sir.
are usually the biographies written by about the kings. I think they would dare not mention anything else except the success of the king.
Babar Nama, I have not read Babar Nama, to be very honest, but I hear it also talks about the cultural world of that period. So in a way, it's giving us an
Yeah, it does.
insight.
It does. It does give
It giving
insight.
us an insight into the cultural world of that period. What is missing probably in Babar Nama is mostly maybe how it impacted him. But he also came and said when he looked at the coconut tree that here is a country that God has blessed with 2 rotis and water in a plant. So that kind of feeling overwhelmed in coming to this country is also there. So the feelings are there, the cultural aspects are there. My entire thesis, of course, was around that autobiographies and biographies are more important than the self-help books. Very recently, I just have the book here and I would like to show this. This book has moved me to no end. Hembati Shen's biography, her memoir, actually, she was a first lady doctor. One of the first, there is a debate between whether it was Kadambari Ganguly or whether it was Shoimbati Shen. So she is a widow who was remarried in that period, during the British period, which was very difficult. And she wrote her notes in Bangla, short stories. So it's very fragmented. It doesn't come up as a whole. And yet it transfers the emotion so strongly that I was moved time and again so much while reading the book that I had to keep it down. And then it made me, to a certain extent realize, what do we complain about? What do we complain about in our lives? And yeah, so I guess that when we talk about lifelong learning, when we talk about quality education, I think autobiographies
Yeah, true.
should form a major part
Yeah,
of us.
Dr. Shobha had some point to make.
Yeah.
Yes, madam.
I was thinking of autobiographies in the recent years by those who are not literates. Baby Haldar's Marathi,
Yes.
the autobiography
Yes.
of a domestic servant, and Nalini
Correct.
Jamila, the autobiography of a sex
Yeah.
worker from Malayalam, where someone else wrote, and she was not happy, and she brought out another version. Actually, 3 versions of her life story, have come, which actually also puts the genre of autobiography in a new light now.
Correct.
And transgenders autobiographies,
Yeah.
So
the untold stories come
it's
forth.
not the domain of the literati anymore.
It's not the domain of the literati anymore. Absolutely, absolutely. And so so we need to stop looking at in teaching. We need to stop looking at change to happen, which Dr. Thorad brought about, change to happen, or the formal education needs to be merged with informal education in a way that these books and these people are more talked about than maybe certain theories which we may not apply at all. I mean, I'm not against literary theories at all, but we need to understand that uh, uh, quality education is much larger in its frame, in its
Yeah,
uh,
I think now the new policies are coming to that extent to bridge this gap
right.
between the formal and the informal thing. Like the latest is what they call as performing professors. Means
Uh-huh. Yeah.
the people who have achieved things not by not going to any formal education, but still have achieved things through informal means.
Yeah.
So understanding those kinds of work
Correct.
is a step towards bridging this gap between the formal and the
Informal. Yeah.
informal, like what you have pointed out.
Yeah.
I hope in the
I
coming
just
days, yeah.
I just wanted to make a point with Dr. Shobha, ma'am, that, when I saw the two movies on adaptations of Shakespeare's Macbeth and Omkara, that was Othello, I thought that they were wonderful adaptations that, in a different setup, in a different context, the exact hubris, the exact tragic flaw being portrayed, and that made it so universal. And in fact, whenever I urge my students to see both, I mean, go to the net, watch Hamlet or Othello there, and then also watch Onkara or also watch Makbul. So, you'll really understand, how these are universal things. So,
Yes, actually, the scholar I was mentioning has worked on 5 versions of Macbeth,
oh,
and and looks at the process of adaptations in some and appropriations in some, and
uh-huh.
those intertextuality in some. Sir was referring to professors of practice, and this has been a matter of huge discussion in academic circles. If these professors were called as visiting, professors with an honorarium for a short period, it would have been okay. But there is some fear among our recently passed out PhD scholars that they will never get jobs. And this is on the lighter note.
Even
Yeah, but
that's on
because
the
they
lighter,
are
but I
employed
think they
for
will only be visiting. Recently, in this context, I just mentioned one thing that some of the countries now they are inviting experienced people to the libraries. Okay, just like they are the living libraries. That students are allowed to interact with them. You just talk to them. There may be a retired doctor, there may be a retired professor, a retired administrator. They come at appointed hours and they just sit in the library. And the students go and just talk to them about their experiences. So this is not reading autobiography, but this is talking autobiography. But you can ask anything from them, or they will tell anything to you, depending on what you are interested in that particular. I think we are running out of time, so I also thank Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi for an interesting talk on meaningful text. So I think it was very helpful for the students in particular who could see the technicality of the language and how best that language can be used. And I hand it over to Dr. Anurag Joshi for or Dr. Rupa Shinde, whomsoever is taking over.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As sir has already given his valuable inputs. So with these, we come to the end of today's plenary session. First of all, I express my deep gratitude to our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Upinder Dhar, for his minute-to-minute guidance and support. I also would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to speakers Dr. M. Shobha, Dr. Somali Gupta, and Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi, who took the time out of their busy schedule and showered us with their pearls of wisdom and knowledge. In the same line, I also thank Dr. K. Guruprasad for gracing this occasion with his presence. I would also like to thank Conference Advisor Dr. Santosh Dhar, Rector Dean FDSR, Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavithyalaya for her support and guidance. I take this opportunity to extend our most sincere thanks to all our delegates and invitees with their presence. I'm sure that you had some memories to carry back home. Thank you very much all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Delighted to meet you, Dr. Guru Prasad. It was very nice. Your
Yeah,
presence
sure.
is-
I work in science, not in literature, but it
doesn't matter. It's wonderful to have you. It's-
No, thank you very much, sir, for
Very
your
much, sir.
valuable comments.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was a
sure.
all the sessions were so enriching and enjoyable.
Exactly, ma'am.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
We learned
Okay.
a lot. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very
Thanks a
much.
lot,
We will be
everyone.
in touch, and
Thank you so
maybe
much.
we can have you for some more time here, Dr. Anurag Joshi and Dr. Rupa Shinde.
Yes, sir.
I think we
Sir,
had
we
Sure,
have-
sir.
interesting talks from them, but maybe because of the time limitation and also it's online. So
Yes,
maybe
sir.
we should have them
So we
offline
have some
so that we can
limitations.
spend more time.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So we request them to find time to come to Indore.
And yes, apologies. I overshot the time. I didn't realize. I kind of go
That's
on
fine.
and on. So
No,
No,
we
ma'am, it
didn't
was
stop
very
you
interesting,
either
ma'am.
because
We
it was
were
interesting
also
for us
enjoying
to
it.
follow you.
yeah, ma'am.
Thank you,
We
sir.
really want all of you to come to Indore.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very
Sure,
much.
sometime I think we have an offline and call all of them and
Yes, sure,
We'd
sure.
love
spend
that.
more
We'd
time
love
with
that.
them. Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you, sir.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
ma'am.
everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
But they're nice people, very nice.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.